I was always terrified of being kicked out of home or disfellowshipped because I feared what Jehovah would do to me. I was taught from a young age that people outside the church, which are referred to by the Jehovah's Witnesses as worldly people, were bad and not to be trusted, as they served Satan. Even the prospect of speaking to the police was extremely scary, as they were also considered to be very bad people. I felt enormous pressure from the church and from my father to be a perfect, obedient child. By the time I was in my early to mid-teens, I felt very isolated and alone. I became quite depressed and at times suicidal. I was forbidden from speaking about the church as it would bring reproach on Jehovah's name. By the time I was about 16, I was determined to leave home for many reasons, including that I wanted to escape Jehovah's Witnesses without being disfellowshipped. I wanted to do it on my own terms. By this I mean that I wanted to fade away from the church and become inactive while retaining my faith, as this course was less likely to result in punishment from Jehovah. It is hard to explain, but I didn't want to be shunned by the only people that I knew as well as live in fear of Jehovah. I think my father abused me when I was about 5 years old. I don't remember anything specific from that time, but I do recall feeling extremely uncomfortable and scared when my father put a nappy on me at night before bed. That memory made a lot more sense to me once I discovered what my father did to my sisters at a similar age. When I was in Year 7, I recall my father asking me and my older sister to give him a kiss. It was a real sloppy kiss on the lips, and I remember thinking that it wasn't right. I didn't like it at all. My father used to tell me I was sexy, and sometimes he would say to me, "You have it, but your sister doesn't." My father often removed my bedroom door because I would either shut it to get dressed or lock it to keep him out. I don't remember any other clear instances of feeling so uncomfortable until I was 17. I suspect that I may have blocked a few things out. In October of 1988, my mother took my siblings to Brisbane to see Expo 88. They were away for about 2 weeks. I had just turned 17 years old, and I wanted to save money to buy a car, so I stayed at home with my father. Although my father beat me a lot, he could also treat me like a normal person. I wanted him to be proud of me, to accept me, and to recognise that I wasn't bad or evil. I thought it would be a good idea to stay at home with him and cook for him whilst my mother was away. I didn't think anything of staying at home alone with him because he was my father. While my mother and siblings were away at Expo, my father sexually assaulted me on a number of occasions. The first time that he tried to have sex with me, he came naked into my bed at night whilst I was sleeping and touched me all over my body. When I protested, I remember him saying to me, "Shh, it's okay, I'm your father. Be obedient to your father." I couldn't believe what was happening. After the first time, I tried to lock my bedroom door, but this made him so angry. While my mother was away, my father touched me and tried to have sex with me on at least 4 or 5 different occasions. I resisted as much as I could each time, but he was a violent man and prone to snap. I was absolutely petrified of him and tried not to make him angry. While my father sexually assaulted me, he quoted Bible scriptures and referred to the scriptures about being more obedient, that he made me put up on my bed, more obedient, that he made me put up my bedroom wall. He said to me, while he sexually assaulted me, "You have to be obedient to me." While my mother was away, my father also gave me alcohol and made me watch pornographic movies with him. After my father had touched me and tried to have sex with me, he behaved completely normal towards me, as if nothing happened. I convinced myself that it was all nightmares, but I always knew it was real. I used to pray to Jehovah to put his angels around my bed to stop my father from coming to me. But he didn't help me, and my father didn't stop. While my mother and siblings were away at Expo, my father took me on a motorbike to a Jehovah's Witness working bee in Cooktown. When we got home, my back was really sore from the motorbike ride, and my father told me he would massage my back for me. He started massaging my back, but moved down and started touching me where I didn't want him to. I told him I didn't want him to do that, but he said, "Shh, be quiet, I'm your father, be obedient." On the last occasion that I remember, my father sexually assaulting me while my mother and siblings were away in Brisbane. He started touching himself and tried to make me touch him as well. When I refused, he said to me with money in his hand, "I'll give you $300 to help you with your car and $300 after if you bend over on the bed." I said to him, "I don't want to do it and I don't need your money." My father became very angry with me and pushed me onto the bed. I managed to get away from him and ran outside. My father chased me through the backyard of our house, but I managed to escape to a neighbour's property. Once my mother and siblings returned from Expo 88, my father started to tell everyone that I was mental, a nutcase, and that I served the devil. He also continued to tell everyone I was a troublemaker. I think that because he was so respected in the congregation, the way he treated me was how everybody else in the congregation treated me, including my own mother, my family, and my family. My father also tightened his control over who I could talk to in the congregation, forbidding me to speak to anybody who he thought I might tell about the abuse. If I broke his rules, he flogged me. I knew that as a Jehovah's Witness, it was my duty to report any wrongdoing to the elders in the congregation. Although I wanted to tell them, I was terrified of doing so. So my father had threatened to beat me and kick me out of home if I ever spoke to anyone without him present. I'm sure that everyone in the congregation knew that my father was a violent man and beat me frequently. I was often forced to attend meetings having just been beaten by my father with his belt and still bleeding from the welts. On one occasion, after my mother returned from Expo 88, I remember my father wanted to get into the bathroom when I was in there. He couldn't get in because I had locked the door, which I wasn't allowed to do. He bashed so violently on the door that it finally broke. And just before the door broke, I had managed to grab a towel to cover myself, and I was standing just behind the door. The door hit me in the face. Not long after that, I went to a meeting at the Kingdom Hall with a black eye. I remember one of the elders, Zinni Ally, that's Dino Ally's brother. asked me, "What happened to your eye?" I replied to him, "My father kicked the bathroom door in my face." Zinny just laughed in response and he said, "Oh, did he?" I felt that Zinny was dismissing what I had told him as though it was a joke. After my mother returned from Expo 88, the sexual abuse stopped, but my father kept knocking me around. He took the door to my bedroom off its hinges. There was no privacy or safety for me at home, not even the toilet, which had no lock or properly closing door. Some months after the sexual abuse had happened, while the rest of my family was away, I started to leave Watchtower magazines open around our house so that my father could see the articles on misconduct. I remember saying to him on one occasion, "I know what you did to me and it's wrong." He said to me in reply, "You're mental." My father left home some 8 or 9 months after October 1988. Before my father left, I tried to talk about the abuse to Lynn Bowditch, who was married to one of the elders in the congregation, Kevin Bowditch. Kevin was a friend of my father's who had helped build parts of our house. I said to Lynn, "I need to talk to you about some stuff that's happened between me and Dad." Lynn spoke to Kevin and reported back to me. Kevin says he can't speak to you without your father present. I also tried speaking to another elder called Dino Ally. Dino was also a good friend of my father's. I remember calling Dino on one occasion from the payphones near the post office in Mareeba, while on my lunch break from my part-time job. I remember sobbing and saying to Dino, "I want to talk to you about things in my family that you don't know about, what my father is doing." Dino said to me, "No, you have to talk to your father first, or he must be present." I said to him, "I can't do that." All I can remember after that is crying. I called Dino to try and talk to him about my father at least twice. In May or June of 1989, about 8 months after my father sexually abused me, while the rest of my family was away, my father left my mother for another woman and had moved out of the family home. Once my father left, I found the courage to tell my friend, who later became my husband, BCJ, about the abuse. I told him that my father's been rude to me. BCJ's first response after I said this was, "Are you making this up to get back at your father for belting you all the time?" And I said to BCJ, "No, and if you don't believe me, then no one will." The next day, when I saw BCJ again, he told me that he had spoken to my father, and he said to me, "It all makes sense now." BCJ did not tell me everything that he and my father spoke about. I don't recall what BCJ said to me, but I do remember getting the impression that my father had admitted to BCJ that something had happened. After that, BCJ said to me, "We need to go to the elders." At that time, BCJ and another friend of mine were probably the only people in the whole congregation who treated me nicely. Soon after, I told BCJ. He arranged a meeting between us and Dino Ally at Dino's workplace. I remember saying to Dino Alloy, "My father has been rude to me." He seemed incensed and said to me, "You do know that this is a very serious allegation you're making?" And I said to Dino, "I know, and that's why I'm saying it." I assume that Dino then spoke to Kevin and to another elder called Ron DeRoy, because within the next couple of days they wanted me to attend what I understood to be a committee meeting. I didn't tell my mother about what happened because she was an emotional wreck after my father had left. I remember meeting with elders, Dino, Ron and Kevin, by myself on a number of occasions for a couple of hours at a time. On one occasion, they brought my father into the room so I could tell him what I had told the elders. I cannot recall exactly how many times I had to meet with the elders. I didn't want to be there, and I felt so uncomfortable. I had nobody to support me. I don't remember anyone really explaining the purpose of the committee meeting to me. But I understood at the time that the elders were investigating what I had alleged. At the first committee meeting, the elders sat me in a room at the Kingdom Hall and came in one at a time and asked me to tell them what happened. After that, they all came in together and asked me more questions. They repeated this process several times. I felt like I was being interrogated and that the elders were trying to find inconsistencies in my story to catch me out. Now, in hindsight, I understand that the elders were investigating whether or not I was a credible witness and if my allegations could have been truthful. Because the elders were all male and all were my father's friends, I was very reluctant to speak to them about what had happened. Unless they asked me a direct question, I didn't really offer the full detail of the sexual abuse. I never felt as though any of the elders believed me. In fact, they seemed incensed by what I was saying and took the allegations personally. They asked me questions like, "Did you enjoy it? And how did you react to that?" At times, it felt as though they were getting off on what I was telling them. The elders told me that I had to tell my mother about my abuse. When I told her that my father had abused me, she asked, "Really? What did he do?" I didn't want to tell my mother any detail, so I said to her, "He has been rude to me." She said to me, "He did that to your older sister when she was 2. I was absolutely gutted and upset. I asked my mother, "How could you have left us alone with him, knowing what he had done to my sister?" My mother said to me, "I didn't think he would do it again because he had become a Jehovah's Witness." After my mother had told me what my father had done to my older sister, it occurred to me that I should check with my 2 younger sisters if he had done anything to them. Together, my mother and I spoke to my younger sisters. They were about 5 and 7 or 8 at the time, and both of them said to me, "Yes, Dad has been rude." I remember my younger sister saying the words to the effect of, "He put his penis between my legs when we were laying down in the lounge room watching TV." I remember my other younger sister saying words to the effect, "He made me have a shower with him and he touched me and massaged my pee in the shower." my mother came with me to tell the elders about my younger sisters. I remember that Rhonda Roy said to us, "We don't want to talk to your sisters because they're too young to know what they're talking about." This response made me so upset because, irrespective of their ages, my sisters were also victims too, and the abuse should have been considered by the elders. At some point after I told the elders about my younger sisters, the elders told me that I had to meet with my father and put the allegations of sexual abuse to him. They sat me down at the opposite end of a table to which I was sitting. I was extremely terrified, but I was trying to be strong and brave. I kept thinking of my little sisters. I remember my hands shaking and my knees knocking together with fear. The elders asked me to tell my father what I had told them. My father became very angry, and I remember him saying, "I'll flog you, I'll hit you, just wait till you get out of this room." The elders didn't stop him from saying all of those things. I remember that later in the meeting, my father said to me, "You seduced me." I responded by saying to him, "You're my father. You're big and fat. Why would I want to seduce you?" Then I confronted my father about my sisters. I said, "You touched my little sisters. I suppose you are going to say that a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old seduced you as well? How could you do that? You always taught us not to lie, and here you are sitting here lying. You're a hypocrite." My father got very angry and said to me, "I'll kill you." He stood up and started to move towards me, but the elders stopped him. I felt very intimidated and anxious about the threats that he had made, and I didn't feel at all protected by the elders. The elders decided to disfellowship my father, but I remember that Rhonda Roy came to visit me at home, and he said to me, "We want to make it very clear that we are not disfellowshipping him for what he did to you, but for other loose conduct." I asked in reply, "Why?" Ron said to me, "Well, we need to have 2 or more witnesses to the same event." And I said in reply, "But what about my sisters?" Though Ron said to me, "It has to be the same event." I was mortified and devastated. It felt so wrong that my father's abuse affected me so much and yet didn't even qualify as something wrong in the eyes of Jehovah's Witnesses, who profess to be acting with the authority of Jehovah and the Holy Spirit, which is considered to be above Australian law. I felt betrayed by my mother because she didn't protect my sisters and me or warn us when she knew what my father was capable of. I consider her complicit in my abuse and in the abuse of my sisters. About a week after he was disfellowshipped, my father appealed the decision of the elders. In or around July 1989, I remember that an appeal committee was formed. 3 elders from other congregations in the area, Joe Morazes, Don Wilson and Jim Bennett, sat on the appeal committee. Don Wilson was the father of my best friend at the time. The elders from the first committee, Kevin, Dino and Ron, also attended the appeal committee meetings. I was called back to appear alone before the appeal committee, although no one explained to me why. This time, my father was sat in the corner of a room and was not allowed to speak to me or threaten me. The appeal committee elders asked me questions and I had to say everything all over again. This time, they were not accusing as the elders in the original committee meeting. Towards the end of the appeal committee meeting, I remember that Kevin Bowditch said to the room, "Can BCH confirm what he did to BCG for her sake?" My father said the words to the effect, "Yes, I stepped out of line." At that time, I understood that in saying this, my father was admitting to have sexually abusing me. At some point, not long after the appeal committee finished their meeting, one of the elders came and told me that my father's disfellowshipping had been upheld. I don't remember which elder spoke to me or exactly what he said. After his appeal was rejected, my father moved away from Mareeba to live in Cairns. Before he left, he used to stalk me and tamper with my mail by opening it and adding handwritten notes, which I tore up and never read. I remember telling Kevin Bowditch about what my father was doing, and it was very intimidating. At one point, I moved out of home to stay with another Jehovah's Witness couple to try and escape my father's stalking and intimidation, but he still managed to find me. I'm aware that my mother told a lot of people in the congregation about what my father had done to me. After he was disfellowshipped, many people said things to me. "I don't believe this happened, and I think you lied." I felt worthless, helpless, and embarrassed. I continued to live in Mareeba and remained a member of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mareeba congregation. In November 1989, I married BCJ, and not long after I married BCJ, I still felt worthless and alone, and I tried to commit suicide by taking an overdose. I had to report my suicide attempt to the elders, as it was a sin against Jehovah. I remember that I spoke to Ron DeRoy about it, and I was chastised because attempting suicide is viewed as a serious wrongdoing in the church. A few years later, I can't recall exactly when, Ron DeRoy came to tell me that my father was going to be reinstated. Nobody had ever asked me if my father had apologised to me. So I said to Ron, "Why are you letting him be reinstated?" And Ron replied to me, "There comes a time when we can't hold him back anymore. He's doing all the right things." I asked Ron, "What right things?" Ron replied, "He's attending meetings." And I said to Ron, "How can you say that? He was attending all of the meetings and giving talks from the platform while he was touching all of his 4 daughters. He's been tampering with my mail, he's been stalking me, and he's not sorry." Ron said to me, "We can't judge that." After Ron DeRoy told me about my father's reinstatement, I said to Ron, "Well, I want to take it to the police because the congregation is not safe and children are at risk." Ron replied to me, "He is now a brother again," and he quoted the scripture that says that we don't take our brothers to court. Ron said to me, "So if you take it to the police, you will bring reproach on Jehovah's name, and you can be disfellowshipped for doing that." I was very upset and disappointed. It seemed that there was to be no justice or acknowledgement for what my father had done to my sisters and me. I felt like we didn't matter, and that the abuse was not considered bad enough in the eyes of Jehovah. Once again, I felt helpless because I feared Jehovah and I feared being disfellowshipped. My life would be worse than it already was. In or around November 1992, my father returned to Mareeba to be reinstated. I remember that when it was announced to the congregation, all of the brothers crowded around my father, shaking his hand and patting him on the back. And despite many people in the congregation knowing what he had done to me and my sisters, I heard members of the congregation say, "Welcome back, BCH, and congratulations, BCH, it's good to see you." I was petrified to be so close to my father, but I stood my ground and refused to acknowledge him. On the 19th of December 1995, I wrote a letter to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society about the reinstatement of my father. In my letter, I described what he had done and the way in which the elders had responded to my allegations. The letter is at QLD.068.001.1410. In response, I received a letter from the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, dated 26th of February 1996, which said that the Watchtower would look into the points of concern that I raised in my letter. The letter also counselled faith in Jehovah. That letter is at QLD.068.001.1409. I did not believe that the Watchtower would or could do anything, and I considered the letter to be a token gesture only. I had already put my faith in Jehovah and prayed to him to protect me from the abuse when it was happening, and he didn't. I had already put my faith in the elders when I reported the abuse to them, and they didn't protect me or support me either. I felt angry, upset, and let down, and I began to feel suicidal again because I felt as though there was no way out for me. In or around 1998 or 1999, my then husband, BCJ, and I moved to Townsville with our 2 sons. Not long after, I had my 3rd son in Townsville. BCJ and I separated, and I left the Jehovah's Witness church. I couldn't stand the hypocrisy anymore, and I was finding it hard to believe that elders and ministerial servants were really appointed by the Holy Spirit. Once I left the church, my 3 children and I were completely shunned, ostracised, and actively avoided by members of the Townsville Jehovah's Witness congregation. The very first thing I did after I left the church was call the police. I was initially scared of the police because I had grown up being taught that everyone outside Jehovah's Witnesses church was to be feared. But the officer in charge of my case, Natalie Bennett, had an awesome manner, and she was very supportive. Throughout the court cases, my only support was from the police and a support person assigned by the court. I gave a statement to the police in or about September 2000. In my statement, I limited what I said to the police about my interactions with the elders. I didn't include in my statement that I had tried to speak to Dino Ally and Kevin Bowditch whilst my father was still at home, and I didn't go into detail at the committee meetings. When I made that statement to the police, I had only just left the Jehovah's Witness church and was still very fearful that if I said too much about the elders at Mariba congregation, I would bring reproach upon Jehovah's name. I was still scared of making Jehovah angry and suffering punishment from him. I didn't immediately give my letter to the Watchtower of December 1995 to the police for the same reason. At my trial,
Statement's got a little way to go. I'm not sure what point you're on.
Would you like to break now, or do you want to keep going?
Could I have a little break?
Well, we can have the luncheon break now if you like, and come back at 2 o'clock. Is that suitable?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll take the agenda.
Yeah, Dr. Jason Morrison, theologist again. I just want to say thank you for watching the videos, and I hope you got plenty of self-rediscovery and freedom out of it. If you watched it on YouTube, please share or like, maybe even comment. If you watched it on Facebook, like, comment, share. But most of all, get out and live. This isn't a rehearsal. You've got a one-off life. Don't let your loyalty and your faithfulness blind you to the life that you should be experiencing. Till the next video, thank you for watching, and bye for now.